1 year after the accident that took his wife, Ethan Merrick drives deep into Silver Pine Valley, Idaho, his daughter Ella asleep in the back seat and a folded $700 receipt trembling in his pocket. Everything he owns left in this world. The cabin he bought looks abandoned, its roof sagging beneath the snow. But he calls it home. As he turns the key, Ranger, his old German shepherd, freezes. Ears raised, eyes locked on the dark doorway. A low growl rolls from his chest, deep and steady, like he's guarding Ethan from something unseen. Then, from inside the cabin, a faint tap echoes back. 3 slow knocks, exactly the way Ethan used to signal his team in combat. What waits behind that door will pull him back into a war he thought he'd left behind. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe some houses remember what happened inside, hit like and subscribe. You won't believe what's buried beneath this one. The first snow of November fell silently over Silver Pine Valley, coating the rusted mailbox and forgotten road signs. The forest stood motionless. Only the sound of tires crunching through ice echoed across the empty stretch. Inside an old blue Ford truck, Ethan Merrick, 37, drove with the focused calm of a man who had seen too much chaos. His angular face, marked by days of sleeplessness, bore a trimmed beard that failed to hide the tension in his jaw. A scar cut faintly across his right eyebrow, his only visible souvenir from a life spent in uniform. His grey-green eyes stayed on the narrow mountain path, wary of every curve. The air inside smelled faintly of engine oil and wet fur. In the passenger seat sat Ella, his 5-year-old daughter, bundled in a puffy red coat. Her soft brown curls brushed against the window as she gazed at the falling snow in silence. She hadn't spoken since the funeral. Her silence, a wall Ethan couldn't break. In the back seat, Ranger, a large German shepherd with silver-grey fur and calm amber eyes, watched his master through the rearview mirror, ears twitching every time Ethan sighed. The cabin appeared just past a curve, half buried in snow and shadows. Its sagging roof and weather-beaten logs looked more like a relic than a home. Ethan parked the truck, letting the engine die in a tired groan. For a moment, he just sat there, hands frozen on the steering wheel, staring at the place that had cost him his last $700. It was madness, buying a forgotten house in the woods when every dollar mattered. But something about the photo he'd seen online had called to him. A man with no mission needs one, he'd told himself. Ella stirred in her seat as he stepped out into the cold, his boots sinking into fresh snow. The wind bit his skin, sharp and clean, like the discipline he used to crave. He opened the truck door for his daughter, offering a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're home, kiddo." She hesitated, clutching her fox tighter, then nodded silently. The front porch creaked under Ethan's weight. The old sign nailed beside the door read, "Pierce Property, Do Not Enter." The words were faded, but still legible, painted in red that had darkened to the color of dried blood. Ranger sniffed the air, his tail low, his fur bristling with unease. Ethan ignored the chill crawling up his neck as he forced the door open. A stale wave of air escaped, dust, mold, and something faintly metallic. He flicked on his flashlight, cutting through the gloom. The interior was worse than he expected. Wallpaper peeling, furniture collapsed, and a fireplace clogged with ash. But the house had bones. He could rebuild bones. Ella's small footsteps crunched behind him as she entered. Ranger stopped at the threshold, his paws rigid on the porch. He let out a low growl, the kind Ethan hadn't heard since Afghanistan, the warning sound of a soldier who senses something wrong. Ethan turned back, his pulse quickening. "It's fine, Ranger. Come." But the dog refused. His ears flattened, his amber eyes fixed on a dark corner of the floor near the staircase. Ethan followed his gaze, then froze. The floorboards there looked uneven, bowed upward, as though something beneath them pushed against the wood. He crouched, tapping the planks lightly with his knuckles. The sound came back hollow, a hidden space. "It's just the foundation," he muttered, but his voice trembled. Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the stillness. Ella's small hand found his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her first word in weeks. "The dog doesn't like it here." Ethan's breath caught. It was the gentlest voice, full of fear and trust all at once. He forced a steady tone. "He's just nervous, sweetheart. It's new for all of us." Yet inside, every instinct screamed that something here was wrong. He guided Ella outside, his flashlight beam trembling over the walls. Near the baseboard, faint outlines of old paint bled through the wood, ghosts of white letters that once warned strangers away. He brushed the dust aside. "Do not dig. Property of Pierce." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Pierce. The name from the auction paperwork. He remembered reading about a missing journalist years ago, a man named Nolan Pierce who had lived somewhere in these mountains. The coincidence twisted in his gut. He looked back toward the house, its dark windows staring like blind eyes into the forest. Ranger stood guard on the porch, body stiff, tail still. His eyes met Ethan's, and in them was not fear, but a warning. A soldier's wordless signal that this ground was not safe. Ethan exhaled slowly, snowflakes melting on his lashes. The wind moaned through the pines, carrying a whisper that almost sounded like footsteps below. And for the first time, he felt the weight of what he had truly bought. Not a home, but the echo of someone else's tragedy. The morning sun struggled through a veil of fog, its pale light turning the snow outside into a sheet of dull silver. Ethan had barely slept. The hollow sound beneath the floorboards haunted his dreams, blending with distant memories of explosions and radio chatter that no longer existed. He stood in the center of the ruined living room, wearing a faded green thermal shirt and old jeans, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Ella sat on the floor nearby, drawing uneven shapes in the dust with a stick. Her red coat hung loosely from her shoulders, and her curls framed a face too quiet for a child her age. Ranger lay near the doorway, his head up, watching Ethan's every move. The dog's ears twitched with each groan of the old house. Ethan tried to ignore the gnawing feeling that the silence here wasn't empty. It was listening. Later that afternoon, he began clearing one of the inner walls to prepare it for repair. The plaster was brittle, crumbling at his touch. He worked methodically, using a small crowbar, but every strike echoed through the hollow structure like a drumbeat. The rhythm made his shoulders tense. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, the same pattern his unit had used to signal danger. He tried to shake it off, focusing on the work. Behind him, Ranger shifted uneasily, tail low. "Relax, buddy," Ethan muttered. But the next sound wasn't from him. A sharp scrape came from inside the wall itself, followed by a faint thud. Ranger lunged forward, claws raking the wood. Dust exploded outward, and a section of plaster collapsed, revealing something wedged in the cavity. A small, weathered wooden box bound with metal clasps. The name Pierce was carved faintly on its lid. Ethan wiped the dust from his face and set the box on the table. It was heavier than it looked. The hinges groaned as he forced it open. Inside, wrapped in rotting paper, lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. The title on the first page read, "Project Hemlock." Tucked between its pages were several faded photographs showing a group of miners standing in front of a tunnel entrance marked Silver Pine Mining Company's 2004. Their faces were smudged with soot, their smiles tense. One figure stood slightly apart from the rest, a man with dark hair and wire-framed glasses holding a camera. Ethan flipped the photo over. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "N. Pierce, final shift." He felt his throat tighten. This wasn't a coincidence. The journalist Clara May had mentioned in town, the one who vanished. He had lived here. This cabin had been his last assignment. As the day dimmed, Ethan placed the journal beside the lantern. He hadn't opened it yet. Something in his gut warned him not to until morning. Outside, the valley had gone silent except for the wind brushing through the pines. He checked on Ella, already asleep in her makeshift bed, clutching her fox beneath a pile of blankets. Ranger lay near the door, still alert, ears flicking toward the sound of the forest. Ethan turned off the lantern and the room fell into darkness. He had just begun to drift when a sound sliced through the quiet. 3 soft knocks from inside the wall, slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. His eyes flew open. For a second, he couldn't breathe. The noise repeated. 3 knocks, then silence. His heartbeat quickened, matching the rhythm, and in an instant, he was back overseas. The air thickened with dust and screams. He could smell diesel, hear the whistle of incoming fire. His muscles seized as panic surged through him. He stumbled to his knees, gasping, clawing for air that wasn't there. Then Ranger barked, a deep, commanding sound that snapped him back to the present. The house was dark, but the dog was standing rigid, staring at the far corner of the room. Ethan forced his breath to steady, gripping the table for support. "It's okay," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. The flashlight beam flickered weakly across the room and landed on the wall near the old fuse box. The light was off. He was sure he had shut the power earlier, yet one of the hallway bulbs now glowed faintly, trembling like a dying candle. It buzzed once, then dimmed, then came back again. Ranger's growl deepened, the sound low and primal. Ethan felt every muscle in his body lock as the light pulsed faster, 3 times, before cutting out completely. The silence that followed was unbearable, a weight pressing on his chest. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice to stay even. "We're fine," he murmured, but his reflection in the black window pane looked anything but. Ranger stepped closer to the wall, nose twitching, as if tracking a scent beneath the wood. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the tension broke. The wind outside howled through the chimney, and the light bulb shattered with a soft pop, scattering glass like frost. Ethan didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat near the cold hearth with the journal in his lap, running his fingers over the embossed letters. Somewhere inside those pages was the truth about what had happened to Nolan Pierce, and maybe a reason for the strange echoes that seemed to follow his family since they arrived. He watched as dawn crept through the window, the pale light revealing dust swirling in the air. Ranger finally lay down beside him, head resting on his boots. The dog's breathing slowed, but his tail remained tense. Ethan looked toward the broken wall. The empty cavity gaped like an open mouth, silent now, but he knew better. Whatever had knocked inside last night wasn't gone. It was waiting. The morning came late, smothered beneath a lid of grey clouds. The forest around the cabin was silent, too silent for comfort. Frost clung to every branch, and the distant river had frozen overnight, its surface glinting like dull steel. Ethan stepped outside, coffee steaming in his hand, and surveyed the land. His breath fogged in the cold air, mingling with the faint smoke curling from the cabin's chimney. Ranger stood beside him, posture alert, tail stiff, a living radar tuned to every sound. Ethan had barely slept. The journal from the wall sat on the table inside, its words whispering through his thoughts. Project Hemmel. Whatever. The crunch of tires on gravel made his stomach tighten. A black pickup truck rolled slowly up the drive, its paint gleaming even under the weak sun. It stopped a few yards from the porch. From the driver's side stepped a tall man in his early 40s, sharply dressed in a navy blue suit that didn't belong in these woods. His shoes were polished, his hair slicked back with precision. His face was handsome in a cold, geometric way, clean-shaven, angular, with steel-grey eyes that didn't smile even when his lips did. "Morning," he said smoothly, voice calm but heavy with authority. "You must be Mr. Merrick. I'm Henderson, representing North Cascade Mining Corporation. We own most of the land around this valley." He extended a gloved hand, but Ethan didn't take it. Something about the man's tone, too practiced, too rehearsed, set his instincts on edge. Henderson's gaze drifted toward the cabin, then the forest beyond. "I heard you bought this property at the county auction. Quite the bargain." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, thick and crisp. "Our company's interested in reacquiring it." It would save you a lot of trouble, Mr. Merrick. $50,000, cash. Ethan froze, then laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. You're offering 50 grand for a wrecked cabin I paid 700 for? You think I don't hear the catch? Henderson tilted his head, a thin smile cutting across his face. No catch, just good business. His eyes flicked toward the front door, where Ella was watching from behind the window curtain. You've got a little one, don't you? Lovely child. It'd be a shame if the well water made her sick. This area's got contamination issues. Old mines, bad runoff, dangerous stuff. He said it casually, as if warning about the weather. But Ethan heard the threat behind every syllable. Take your check, Ethan said, voice low, and drive back the way you came. Henderson sighed, feigning disappointment. That's unfortunate. We like to settle things peacefully. He slipped the envelope back into his coat and glanced at Ranger, who was now standing halfway between them, hackles raised. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to reach me. He tossed a business card onto the porch. The logo of North, Cascade Mining, was embossed in silver, too polished to be real. Then he climbed back into the truck, engine humming quietly as he reversed down the icy road. Ethan watched until the taillights disappeared behind the trees. Only then did he pick up the card. The phone number printed on it was disconnected. Inside, the air felt heavier. Ella sat at the table, drawing with her crayons. Who was that man, Daddy? She asked, her voice timid. Just someone who got lost, Ethan lied, forcing a smile. He glanced through the window. Ranger was pacing near the porch, nose close to the ground. When the dog stopped suddenly and started digging near one of the porch posts, Ethan's heart sank. He went out to check. The snow had been disturbed. Underneath, half buried, was a small military-style ammunition crate, new and clean, out of place among the decay. The label printed on the side read, 9mm ball, Federal Cartridge Co. The box hadn't been there yesterday. He crouched, fingertips brushing the cold metal, then pulled his hand back quickly. It was warm, recently handled. That night, the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Ethan sat by the fire with Ranger lying at his feet, the dogs breathing restless. Ella had fallen asleep early, curled under blankets near the hearth. The power had flickered twice that evening, though the weather wasn't bad enough for outages. Every sound in the cabin felt amplified, the pop of wood, the whistle of air through cracked windows, the creak of old beams. Ethan tried to read the journal again, but the words blurred under the shifting firelight. A phrase caught his eye. Water samples compromised. Toxic seepage spreading through groundwater. His stomach twisted. He remembered Henderson's smirk. Don't let the girl drink from the well. A sudden thump on the porch made him jolt upright. Ranger's head shot up, ears forward. Another sound followed. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving along the outer wall. Ethan grabbed the Maglite flashlight from the shelf, its weight comforting in his hand. He turned off the lantern to let his eyes adjust, then edged toward the door. Ranger growled, low and steady. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, only the wind moved. Ethan yanked open the door. Nothing. Just swirling snow and the faint outline of boot prints leading away toward the tree line. He followed them with the beam, but they stopped abruptly halfway down the path, vanishing into untouched snow. He locked the door and backed away. His breathing quickened as he turned to check on Ella. She was still asleep, but the fireplace had dimmed to embers. The house seemed to settle deeper into its own weight. Then came the faintest noise from above, wood creaking, as if someone was walking across the attic floor. Ranger went rigid, teeth bared. Ethan's blood ran cold. There was no attic, just a crawl space sealed years ago. He grabbed the crowbar leaning against the wall, motioning Ranger to stay close. Step by step, he climbed the old staircase. Each step groaned under his boots. The hallway stretched ahead, the shadows thick as smoke. He reached the ceiling hatch, heart pounding, and pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. Then 3 faint taps. He froze, pulse hammering. The same rhythm as before, 3 knocks, then silence. Ranger barked sharply from below, the sound exploding through the house. A crash followed. Ella's frightened scream. Ethan spun and charged down the stairs 2 at a time. The front door was wide open, wind whipping through the living room. Ranger was barking furiously toward the forest, his body half out the doorway. Ethan scooped Ella into his arms, her cheeks wet with tears. "Someone was outside," she sobbed. "A man in the window." Ethan's grip tightened around her. "It's okay, baby. I've got you." But as he looked past Ranger into the night, he caught a flash of movement, just a silhouette between the trees. A man standing perfectly still, watching the cabin. Then, like a shadow swallowed by fog, he disappeared. Ethan slammed the door and dropped the heavy latch into place. The silence that followed was absolute. He held Ella close, feeling the tremor in her small body, the echo of his own fear. Ranger sat by the window, unblinking, guarding the darkness beyond. For a long time, Ethan stood there, staring at the faint reflection of his family in the glass. He had faced ambushes, mortar fire, the sound of death itself, but nothing unnerved him like this. The feeling that the war had followed him home. Somewhere out there, in the forest beyond Silver Pine Valley, someone, or something, was hunting them. The morning light crept weakly through a curtain of fog, turning the valley into a landscape of ash and breathless silence. Frost clung to the cabin's windows, blurring the outline of the forest beyond. Ethan stood beside the old stone well, breath misting in the air. His hands were numb from the cold, but the metallic taste of fear made his senses sharp. He pumped the handle once, twice, until a gurgle echoed from below and a stream of water splashed into the bucket. For a second, it looked clean. Then a strange, oily sheen rippled across the surface, reflecting sickly rainbows in the pale light. He frowned, leaned closer, and caught the sharp, acrid smell. Chemical, artificial, impossible to mistake. Gasoline. Or worse. He dropped the bucket instantly, heart pounding. Ranger, who had been pacing nearby, let out a low growl, his ears flat against his skull. The dog nudged the bucket with his nose, then barked sharply, backing away. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, stepping back. His stomach twisted as realization set in. Someone had poisoned their only water source. He sprinted back into the cabin, boots thudding across the wooden floor. Ella sat at the table, humming softly as she drew with her crayons, oblivious to the danger. Ethan forced a calm tone. "Sweetheart, don't touch anything outside, okay? Daddy just needs to make a call." She nodded, eyes wide and trusting. He grabbed his phone from the counter and unlocked it. There was a new message. No number, no name. Just 4 words in plain black text. "If you want to live, leave Silver Pine now." His thumb hovered over the screen. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. But from who? He hesitated, then dialed the local sheriff's office. After several rings, a gravelly voice answered. "Silver Pine Sheriff's Department, Morgan speaking." Sheriff Ray Morgan had a voice like sandpaper and a reputation for being old school. Ethan had met men like him before. Square shoulders, small-town authority, eyes that always measured before they cared. "Sheriff, my name's Ethan Merrick. I'm at the old Pierce property off Mill Creek Road. Someone's been trespassing. They poisoned my well, left ammo on my porch, and I'm getting threats." There was a long pause. Then Morgan's tone cooled several degrees. "Mr. Merrick, that property's been trouble for years. I suggest you stay calm and stop stirring up old stories. There's nothing out there worth finding." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Sheriff, I'm telling you, someone wants us gone." Morgan's sigh crackled through the line. "You're new here, so I'll give you a bit of advice. People around this valley don't take kindly to strangers digging into things that aren't theirs. Keep your head down, and you'll be fine." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, bile rising in his throat. The message wasn't incompetence. It was complicity. By noon, the fog had thinned, but his unease only deepened. He spent the next few hours cleaning the truck, trying to distract himself while Ella played with Ranger near the porch. The air smelled faintly of bleach and rust from the poisoned water, and every creak of the woods sounded like a whisper. He decided they would drive to town, get bottled water, food, maybe a mechanic to check the brakes. The snow along the dirt road had melted into slush, and the valley felt smaller, hemmed in by dark pines. Ethan's hands were tight on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the road ahead. Ella sat in the passenger seat this time, clutching her stuffed fox. "Are we going somewhere fun?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Ethan forced a smile. "Just to town, sweetheart. We'll get some pancakes." Ranger lay in the truck bed, tail flicking nervously. He hated leaving the woods, but his loyalty kept him still. They were halfway down the incline towards Silver Pine when Ethan pressed the brake pedal. Nothing. The truck didn't slow. He pressed again, harder. The pedals sank to the floor with no resistance. His heart lurched. The engine roared, the truck picking up speed on the icy slope. "Hold on!" he shouted, gripping the wheel as Ella screamed. Trees blurred past. The guardrail ahead loomed dangerously close. Ethan yanked the handbrake. It snapped uselessly. The truck fishtailed, skidding sideways. In the back, Ranger barked frantically, claws scraping metal. Then, in a burst of motion, the dog lunged toward the cab window, his jaws clamping down on the emergency brake lever. The sudden resistance jerked the truck violently, tires screeching. The vehicle spun once, twice, before grinding to a halt just feet from the cliff's edge. Steam hissed from under the hood, and silence fell heavy as snow. Ethan sat frozen, his breath ragged. Ella sobbed into his arm, shaking. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, pulling her close. His hands trembled, adrenaline flooding his veins. He climbed out, boots crunching on the icy road, and walked to the front of the truck. The brake line dangled, cleanly severed, cut by a blade. Not rust, not age. Intent. He crouched, staring at the bright sheen of fresh hydraulic fluid seeping into the snow. "Someone did this," he muttered. Ranger pressed close to his leg, tail stiff, growl low and guttural. "You saved us," Ethan said softly, kneeling to meet the dog's eyes. Ranger's tongue flicked against his hand, a soldier's reassurance. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. He thought about Henderson's cold smile, about Sheriff Morgan's evasive voice, about the poison in the well. It wasn't random. It was pressure. They wanted him scared, desperate enough to leave. But they didn't understand the kind of man he was. Ethan Merrick had lost everything once. He wasn't running again. He lifted Ella into his arms and carried her back to the truck, every step deliberate, his resolve hardening. Like ice. They crept back up the slope in low gear, avoiding the main road, taking the forest path that looped toward the back of the property. Every sound of the tires over gravel felt like a countdown. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. The forest had gone quiet again, the kind of silence that comes after violence. Ethan parked the truck behind the house, out of sight. He carried Ella inside, tucked her into bed, and watched her until her breathing steadied. Then he went outside with Ranger, flashlight in one hand and his old combat knife in the other. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like the moment before a storm. Near the well, the ground was disturbed, boot prints, small but clear, leading into the woods. He followed them for 20 yards before they vanished among the roots. A faint sound carried on the wind, a metallic clang like a car door closing far away. Ranger growled once, the fur along his spine rising. Ethan whispered, "Let them come." He was done waiting. That night, as he sat by the dying fire, he replayed everything, the poisoned water, the message, the cut brake line. Each act was precise, calculated. Whoever was behind this had resources, connections, and no hesitation to kill. He stared at the journal on the table, its pages now a map of danger instead of discovery. A line he hadn't noticed before caught his eye, scrawled in the margin by Nolan Pierce's handwriting. If they can't buy you, they'll bury you. Outside, wind battered the shutters. Ranger lay awake beside him, eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. The world had gone narrow, stripped of illusions. Ethan understood now. He wasn't fighting for a house. He was fighting to keep his family alive. The storm came without warning. A low, rolling growl swept down from the northern ridge, and within minutes, the valley disappeared behind a curtain of white. The air thickened with snow, swallowing sound and color, until even the cabin seemed to dissolve into the haze. Ethan stood at the window, watching the storm's fury, his reflection faint against the glass. Behind him, the fire flickered weakly, shadows crawling across the walls. Ranger paced near the door, restless, his fur bristling at every gust of wind. The world outside looked frozen in time. Danger and silence fused together. Ella sat bundled in a blanket on the couch, holding her fox close. "Is it going to break the house?" she asked softly. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, sweet pea. The cabin's stronger than it looks." He smiled, but his eyes betrayed the unease gnawing at him. They were trapped, and storms like this had a way of burying secrets, and the people who found them. Hours passed before the wind began to ease. Ethan took the opportunity to inspect the property. The air outside was brittle and sharp, every breath stinging his lungs. The snow was knee-deep, untouched, except for Ranger's paw prints. The dog led the way, nose close to the ground, moving with deliberate purpose. "What is it, boy?" Ethan muttered, following. Ranger stopped near the edge of the old oak grove behind the cabin, an area they hadn't explored since moving in. The snow there looked disturbed, as if the earth beneath had shifted. Ethan knelt, brushing away the top layer with his gloved hands. A dark shape glimmered under the ice, metal, rectangular. He dug faster, breath fogging the air, until his fingers scraped against a hard surface. The outline became clear, a black pelican case, half buried in the frozen ground. The latches were rusted but intact. Ranger whined softly, tail low. Ethan pried the case free, his heart hammering as he recognized the military-grade build. Airtight, waterproof, indestructible. Someone had hidden it with care. He carried it back to the porch, setting it down on the steps. The hinges groaned when he forced them open. Inside, the contents were perfectly preserved beneath layers of plastic sheeting. A folded map labeled Project Hemlock Sites, a stack of photographs, and a sealed envelope marked "To whom it may concern." The map was hand-drawn but detailed, showing the Silver Pine Valley and a network of tunnels branching like veins under the forest. Red circles marked 5 locations. One was labeled Mill Creek. Ethan's cabin sat directly on top of it. He turned to the photos. They were grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. Logan Hart, a man Ethan recognized from old news reports, standing beside Sheriff Ray Morgan, exchanging a thick envelope of cash. Hart was in his 50s back then, a broad-shouldered industrialist with slick blonde hair and a reputation for ruthless business tactics. His company, Hart Minerals, had been accused of multiple environmental violations before mysteriously vanishing from headlines. Morgan, younger in the photo, wore the same cold expression Ethan had seen on the phone. Calculating, unrepentant. The final item in the case stopped Ethan cold. A folded letter in fading ink, signed by Daniel Pierce, Nolan's younger brother, and a journalist himself. Ethan unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was frantic but precise. "If you found this, it means I failed to get the truth out. Project Hemlock isn't about mining. It's about disposal. Toxic waste buried under land owned by Hart Minerals, hidden through fake leases and false geological reports. The county's been paid off. The police are in on it. The real proof, contracts, recordings, manifests, is secured in safety deposit box Juano 4 at First National Bank, Boise. I won't make it there, but maybe you can." The letter ended with a single, chilling line. They poisoned the land to hide their crimes, and they'll kill anyone who tries to clean it. Ethan read it twice, the weight of the words pressing on him like the storm itself. He could feel the truth settling. Every threat, every shadow, every silence had led here. As he stared at the map again, he realized the red circles marked not just random sites. They traced the flow of groundwater beneath the valley. The poison from the old mines was spreading, feeding into local wells, including his own. He looked toward the frozen forest, a cold fury rising in his chest. Someone had known all along, and they had killed to keep it buried. Ranger nudged his leg, whining softly, breaking his trance. Inside the cabin, Ella's laughter echoed faintly, innocent, unaware. Ethan knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep her here any longer. That afternoon, the storm cleared enough for him to make the drive down the mountain. The sky glowed a pale gold, fragile after the violence of the blizzard. Ethan packed a small duffel with food, a pistol, the Pelican case, and the journal. He called June Walker, the only neighbor he trusted, a woman in her early 50s who lived a mile east, alone since her husband's passing. June was tall and lean, with short silver hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She'd once been a nurse and had a calm, unflinching way about her. When Ethan knocked, she opened the door in a flannel shirt and denim vest, her hands still smelling faintly of firewood and soap. "You look like hell, Merrick," she said, her voice rough but kind. "What's happened?" He hesitated, scanning the quiet of her cabin before speaking. "There's something bad in Silver Pine, June. I need to go to Boise to get proof, but Ella, she's not safe out there." June studied his face, seeing the truth behind his exhaustion. "Leave her with me," she said simply. "Nobody comes this far up the ridge. She'll be fine." Ethan knelt beside Ella, who clung to Ranger's neck. "I'll be back soon," he promised. "You listen to June, okay? And take care of Ranger." Ella nodded, though her lip trembled. "You'll come back?" He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. "Always." June rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Go do what you have to. I've seen that look before. Soldier on a mission." She led Ella inside, the door closing softly behind them. For a long moment, Ethan stood there in the fading light, the weight of duty pressing against his ribs. The forest stretched before him, endless and cold. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and looked back once. Ranger sitting by the window, eyes following him until the trees swallowed the view. The road to Boise was long and treacherous, cutting through black ice and winding cliffs. Ethan drove with the precision of habit, every sense alive, every shadow a threat. He could almost feel Henderson's eyes somewhere behind him, or Morgan's quiet contempt lingering like smoke. The truth was close now, close enough to kill for. The headlights carved through the snow, illuminating the narrow path ahead. He whispered to himself, a soldier's prayer against the dark. Just one more mission. The road to Boise stretched endless under a grey sky. Snow had turned to sleet, the kind that stuck to the windshield like ash. Ethan's eyes burned from fatigue, but adrenaline kept him sharp. Every mile carried the weight of purpose. Daniel Pierce's letter, the photos of Logan Hart, the poisoned wells, the silent graves. He drove through the frozen emptiness like a man chasing ghosts. By the time he reached the city, dusk had settled in a dull orange glow behind the skyline. The First National Bank stood at the corner of 8th and Bannock, its marble facade grim under the streetlights. Inside, the warmth and corporate sterility felt foreign after weeks in the mountains. The clerk, a short man with sandy hair and polite detachment, checked his ID and handed him a key. "Box 104, lower level," he said, voice flat, as if reciting from a script. The vault was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Ethan inserted the key, the metal cold against his fingers, and turned it slowly. The drawer slid out with a mechanical sigh. Inside were 3 items: a small ledger bound in black leather, a bundle of faded contracts, and a micro SD card labeled Croft Meeting. His pulse quickened. He flipped through the ledger. pages of transactions, coded payments, falsified land deals connecting Hart Minerals, North Cascade Mining, and a shell company under Morgan's name. The contracts confirmed the sale of multiple mining parcels that didn't exist, the same land where toxic waste had been buried. The evidence was ironclad. He pocketed the SD card and the ledger, sealing the box again. Outside, the city was a blur of snow and neon. Ethan parked in an alley behind an old diner to call the only person he still trusted, Mark Reynolds, a former FBI agent and one of the few men who'd stood beside him during his service. Reynolds was in his 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that carried both strength and weariness. His dark hair was streaked with grey, and a rough scar cut across his jaw, a souvenir from a mission gone wrong in Kabul. Despite the years, his eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that saw through lies before they were spoken. He'd left the bureau after exposing internal corruption, a move that made him both respected and hunted in equal measure. Ethan trusted him because he'd never sold out. "Reynolds," Ethan said when the line connected, "I found something. Project Hemlock wasn't a mining op. It was a cover for chemical dumping. I've got proof. Contracts, ledgers, names." Reynolds exhaled sharply. "You're in deep, Merrick. If what you're saying is true, you've just stepped on the tail of a billion-dollar lie. Meet me in 1 hour, west parking lot of Caldwell Station. Don't bring anyone. Don't call again." The line went dead. Ethan tucked the phone away, scanned the street, and started the truck. Snow began to fall harder, thick flakes spinning through, the air like ash. When he arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars sat under flickering street lamps, their windshields glazed with frost. Then he saw it. A dark SUV, engine running, headlights dim. He approached cautiously, hand hovering near the holster beneath his coat. The driver's window was fogged. He tapped it once. No response. He opened the door and froze. Mark Reynolds sat motionless behind the wheel, eyes staring blankly ahead. A single gunshot wound bloomed dark on his temple. His service pistol lay in his lap, positioned perfectly, too perfectly. Ethan's throat constricted. He reached for the phone on the passenger seat. One new message blinked on the screen. He knows. His blood ran cold. A sound behind him. The crunch of boots on snow. Ethan turned sharply, gun drawn. From the shadows stepped Henderson, his navy suit replaced by a black tactical coat dusted with snow. His expression was calm, almost pleasant. "You're a difficult man to follow, Merrick," he said. Behind him, 2 men emerged, both armed, both built like hired muscle. One was tall and bald, his jaw covered in stubble, tattoos crawling up his neck. The other was shorter, wiry, with a crooked nose and eyes that twitched constantly. Henderson stopped a few paces away, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "I'd told you once this could end peacefully. You could have taken the money, walked away. But you're like Pierce. You think the truth saves people. It doesn't. It buries them." Ethan's voice was low but steady. "You killed him." Henderson tilted his head slightly, smiling. "He killed himself, didn't he? That's what the report will say. Just like it said for Daniel Pierce." The taller thug stepped forward, raising his rifle. Henderson didn't flinch. "Hand over the card, and maybe the girl gets to grow up." The words struck like a blade. Ethan's muscles tightened, rage and fear colliding. "You don't touch my daughter." Henderson's smirk widened. "Then make it easy." The first shot rang out like thunder. Ethan dove behind Reynolds' SUV as glass shattered. He fired back twice, hitting the shorter gunman in the shoulder. The man screamed, collapsing into the snow. Henderson shouted an order, his composure breaking. Bullets tore through the night, ricocheting off metal. Ethan rolled, returned fire, clipped the second shooter's leg, and sprinted toward the far side of the lot. His breath came in sharp bursts, his boots slipping on ice. Henderson's voice echoed through the storm. "You can't outrun this, Merrick. They'll find you. They always do." Then a new sound, deep, guttural, and alive. A snarl. Ethan turned just in time to see a blur of fur explode through the side door of the nearby diner. Ranger. The dog launched himself at the uninjured gunman, jaws locking onto the man's arm with bone-crushing force. The rifle clattered to the ground as the man screamed. Henderson spun, raising his pistol. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired once, the shot catching Henderson in the shoulder. The man staggered back, clutching his wound, eyes burning with fury. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, voice trembling now. "You don't know who runs this." Ethan advanced, gun steady, breath ragged. "Maybe not yet, but I know who bleeds." He kicked Henderson's weapon away and backed toward the truck. Ranger released the fallen man, blood staining his muzzle, and leapt into the passenger seat as Ethan gunned the engine. Bullets followed, punching holes through the rear window as the truck fishtailed out of the lot. Snow swallowed the sound of the tires as they disappeared into the storm. Henderson collapsed against a lamppost, blood soaking his coat. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He lifted it with shaking fingers. A deep, distorted voice came through the speaker. "You failed." Henderson swallowed hard. "He has the card." The voice was silent for a moment, then coldly said, "Then make sure he doesn't live to use it." The line went dead. Ethan drove blindly through the storm, the city lights fading behind him. His hands were slick with sweat despite the cold, his heart pounding against his ribs. Ranger whimpered softly, paw resting on Ethan's arm. "I know, buddy," Ethan whispered. "I know." He looked down at the SD card on the seat. Small, ordinary, but heavy with consequence. The blood that stained its label was not just Reynolds's or Henderson's. It was the price of truth. Outside, snowflakes turned into shards of glass against the windshield. He didn't know how far the corruption reached. The bank, the sheriff, the corporations, maybe higher. But he knew this. Someone powerful had started a war long before he arrived. And now, he was part of it. As he left the city behind, a siren wailed in the distance, swallowed quickly by the storm. Ethan pressed harder on the gas, headlights cutting through the blizzard. "Hang on, Ella," he murmured under his breath. "I'm coming back, no matter what." The truck roared into the dark, carrying the truth, the blood, and the last fragile hope of redemption through a world buried in snow. The world was still grey when Ethan reached the outskirts of Hartridge Mining, a derelict industrial site buried beneath years of snow and neglect. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the horizon glowed faintly, a pale promise of dawn. His truck crept along the cracked service road, headlights slicing through fog. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, breath steaming against the glass, his amber eyes fixed on the distant silhouettes of rusted towers. The place reeked of decay and secrecy. This was where Daniel Pierce's letter had led him. Ethan parked near the main warehouse, the structure looming like a dying beast. Half its roof had collapsed, and its windows were black with frost. A faded sign still hung above the gate. Hartridge Mining. Safety first. The irony made his jaw tighten. He loaded his pistol, checked his knife, and slipped through the broken fence. Inside the warehouse, silence pressed heavy. Rows of corroded barrels lined the walls, marked with hazard symbols and serial codes matching those from the Hemlock files. The air stank of chemicals, sharp, acrid, metallic, and the ground was slick with frozen runoff. A single beam of morning light pierced the roof, illuminating a cluster of servers at the center of the floor, still faintly humming beneath layers of dust. Cables snaked like veins across the concrete, leading to a terminal that flickered weakly. Ethan brushed away frost from the monitor, revealing a login screen. He connected the SD card labeled Croft Meeting and waited. The screen came to life. Video footage filled the display. In the footage, Logan Hart stood in a conference room, shaking hands with Sheriff Morgan and several men in suits. Their conversation was clear, captured by a hidden camera. "You bury it under the mountain, the government signs off, and the money flows," Hart said, his tone smug. And if anyone asks, it's an environmental restoration project. The footage was time-stamped. 2005. Proof undeniable. Ethan copied the data to his flash drive, heart pounding. A low growl from Ranger made him freeze. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Two figures emerged through the haze of dust and light. Henderson stepped forward first, his right arm bound in a sling, face pale but eyes burning with hate. Behind him came Logan Hart. Older now, but still imposing, his blonde hair swept back neatly, his long black coat immaculate despite the cold. His posture radiated power, the arrogance of a man who had never faced consequence. "You just couldn't leave it alone," Hart said, his voice calm, measured, the tone of someone accustomed to control. "You had to dig, just like Pierce. You people never learn." Henderson smirked faintly, blood crusted on his collar. "Told you, boss. He's like a ghost that doesn't stay buried." Ethan's eyes flicked between them, assessing. "You poisoned an entire valley. You killed everyone who tried to expose you. That ends now." Hart chuckled, shaking his head. "Ends? You think truth ends anything? The files, the footage, all of it dies here. This warehouse goes up in flames, and you along with it." He nodded toward the corner, where two men in fire-retardant suits were stacking drums near a portable incinerator. A trail of gasoline shimmered faintly in the light, snaking toward the open flame. Henderson drew his gun, aiming at Ethan's chest. "Say goodbye, soldier." Before the trigger could pull, Ethan tossed a small metal canister from his belt, a military smoke charge, relic from his service days. It clattered across the floor, hissing. Dense white smoke erupted instantly, filling the warehouse with choking fog. Shouts echoed in confusion. Ranger lunged, slamming into Henderson, teeth tearing into his arm as gunfire exploded through the haze. Ethan dove behind a crate, firing twice. One bullet struck the incinerator switch, sending sparks across the gasoline trail. Flames raced outward. Chaos followed. Henderson screamed, staggering backward as Ranger dragged him down. Hart cursed, fumbling for cover. Ethan crawled to the terminal, yanked the power cable, and pocketed the drive just as an explosion tore through the far wall. The world went white. When the smoke cleared, Henderson lay motionless amid the debris, eyes open, blood seeping into the snow. Hart, clutching his burned arm, staggered toward the exit, only to freeze as red and blue lights strobed through the cracks in the wall. Sirens wailed outside. A convoy of black SUVs skidded into the lot. FBI units, their agents fanning out with weapons drawn. Through the blizzard stepped June Walker, wrapped in a dark parka, flanked by two agents. Her silver hair whipped in the wind, but her eyes were steady. She held a satellite phone in one gloved hand. "It's over, Hart," she called. "Reuters has the files. Your faces are already on the morning feed." The old tycoon's expression faltered for the first time, disbelief giving way to rage. "You think the world cares?" he spat. "They'll forget in a week." June's gaze hardened. "Then we'll remind them every day." Hart lunged for a nearby pistol, but an FBI sniper's warning shot shattered the ice beside his feet. He dropped the gun. Sheriff Morgan, dragged from a nearby truck by two agents, stared blankly at the scene. The man who'd buried justice now bound in handcuffs. Ethan stepped out from the smoke, soot streaking his face, exhaustion etched deep into his features. Ranger padded beside him, limping slightly, but alive. June met his eyes with a faint, tired smile. "You did it, Merrick," she said softly. "No," he replied, glancing toward the wreckage. "Pierce did. I just finished his fight." The FBI agents led Hart and Morgan to their cars. Snow began to fall again, gentle this time, softening the edges of destruction. 2 weeks later, Silver Pine Valley awoke to the sound of construction, instead of sirens. Volunteers from nearby towns had come to help rebuild. Carpenters, veterans, neighbors who once feared the poisoned land. The $700 cabin stood restored, its timber walls reinforced, its windows glowing with new light. A clean well had been drilled beside it, water clear as glass. Ethan stood outside in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, watching as Ella and Ranger played in the yard. The girls' laughter rang like music through the cold air. She tossed a snowball high, and Ranger leapt to catch it mid-air, his bark echoing against the mountains. June waved from the fence, her hands tucked in her coat pockets. "You're staying then?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah. For once I think we've earned the quiet." She nodded. Silver Pine could use more of that. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the valley bathed in gold. Ethan leaned against the porch post, arms folded, watching his daughter and the dog. Survivors, both. The land that once whispered of secrets now carried laughter again. Somewhere in the distance, a lone hawk circled above the pines, its cry fading into the sky. Ethan felt the tightness in his chest ease. Not victory, not relief, but peace. The kind that comes only after facing the dark and walking out of it alive. He turned toward the cabin, the glow of the hearth spilling through the windows, and smiled. What had begun as a grave had become a home. And as the first stars appeared above the valley, the last trace of Project Hemlock dissolved into the cold, clear night. In the end, Ethan's story isn't just about courage or survival, it's about faith. When everything around him was buried in darkness, a single act of trust led him toward the light. Sometimes, God doesn't calm the storm. He walks us through it, reminding us that miracles still happen when we refuse to give up. Just like Ethan, we all face our own valleys, moments when hope feels frozen. But light always returns with the dawn. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder of faith. Leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and may God bless and protect you and your loved ones. Miracles are real. Sometimes they come disguised as courage, love, and second chances.